I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to Mary Helen Brown from the Department of Journalism, acting chair of the Department of Journalism. But before I do that, I have to say that I have known the author now for a number of years. He and his Confederate Mickey Logue, who's also here, have spent hours and hours in special collections researching historical photographs of Auburn, the city, and the university. And I know most of you know them, and if you do, you know what great fellows they are. And if you don't, you've really missed something and need to get to know them. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown at this point.
Howdy, y'all. I am Mary Helen Brown from Center, Texas. I always have to say that, and everybody always asks me if that's the center of Texas. No. I just like everybody to know where I'm from. Because part of this, I'm watching folks come in, this does remind me of my hometown of Center, Texas. And I've noticed that you're bringing in folding chairs. And in my hometown at the church, that means one of two things. It's either Easter or you're particularly interested in making sure someone is dead. Those are the two things. So we're setting a precedent. So Jack, buddy, you're in high cotton here. Jay Lamar asked me to introduce Jack Sims. And I said, well, Jay, how long do I have to introduce him? And she said, oh, I don't know, 2-3 minutes. I said, Jay, I cannot do that. It is impossible to introduce Jack Sims in 2 to 3 minutes. So I'm going to do a little hand check. How many of y'all know Jack? Good. So I will briefly speak to Jack's character. Again, I'm going back to my hometown. More specifically, I'm going to speak of Jack as a character. Now, in my hometown of Center, Texas, back there in Deep East Texas, one of the highest compliments you can pay somebody is to call them a character, unless you immediately follow that with, well, bless his heart. But Jack is a true character. He's been a character in my life ever since I arrived here at Auburn, a lucky day 24 years ago. I heard stories about Korea, about Olympics. Occasionally I'd run into him out in the cemetery playing like he was somebody else. So I knew he was a true character. But my favorite story about Jack Sims, and I'm going to relate this to you, is about Jack as a teacher, because Jack is a marvelous teacher. And I'm not even sure this story is true, but I had so many people tell me that it ought to be true. I am a Texan, so truth doesn't matter that much. Apparently, before he would teach, Jack would get a hard candy and pop it in his mouth and suck on it a little while before he'd teach. Just, moisten your breath. A lot of us do things like that. So Jack had done this, and apparently it had gotten down to a little bitty piece of hard candy in his mouth, and he was talking to probably Journalism 101. And partway through the lecture, the little bitty teeny tiny piece of candy flew from his mouth and landed on someone's cheek. To which Jack is alleged to have said, "My tooth!" So, ladies and gentlemen, you already know him. All except I think about 3 people. Y'all share. This is my friend, Jack Sims, a true character.
Well, everybody in the room knows me. I wish I knew as many of you as know me, but I don't. Let's see. I can call about 4 or 5 names now. I'm reminded of the guy that I saw in the grocery store the other day. And it was somebody that I knew, but I couldn't remember his name. And he was kind of walking along, and I went up to him and I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Jack Sims. Good to see you again." And he said, "Yeah." And he kind of looked off into space, and I said, I'm not too good on names. Would you mind telling me your name?" And he looked at me and he says, "How soon do you need to know?" But I do know, I just watched this motley crowd come in here, and I think every would-be historian in Lee County is in this room. And but I feel perfectly at ease because I'm not from Texas, but when you see my text, you'll know that I maybe should be from Texas. Okay, I put together a bunch of pictures, and Mickey did an awful lot of the work on compiling them, but he didn't know I was going to use them for this purpose, but I did. And I probably have many too many. So what I'm going to do is talk until about 5 minutes till 5, and I hope somebody will say, hey, quit. And Joe, you're responsible. Okay, and I'm just going to quit because I don't think I'm going to get through with everything I have. So let me start. Lee County, Alabama, was part of Macon County until about 1866, and it was owned by the Creek Indian Nation into the 1830s. A Methodist minister who had enjoyed the fever-free climate and seen the fertile land and the plentiful supply of clear water urged planter friends in Harris County, Georgia, to come on over to Alabama and homestead in East Alabama. Judge John J. Harper, our founder, he did a little investigating and decided he was going to do it. So he took a group and headed out into the wilderness. They included his 8 sons and 3 daughters, as well as other settlers and their children, and slaves and livestock. And the 40-mile trek ended at a clearing in Alabama, a clearing with no name. One of the judge's sons had received a deed for land in the area from the U.S. government, and Judge Harper negotiated with the Indians, friendly Indians, and acquired more acreage, and then the Indians moved on west toward Notasulga. And work started immediately on building the community, and by 1838, there was a school, post office, Methodist and Baptist churches, a log cabin, and a few stores. But still, no name. The Judge Harper's son Thomas was on his way to Harris County on business and spent the night on the way to the Swenson Taylor family farm, and there he met the Taylor's 15-year-old daughter, Lizzie. And when he described to her the unnamed village, she responded, "Oh, name it Auburn. Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain." Let's get that right one more time. Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain. Not on the plains, not in the plain or over the plain. Oh. And even Auburn University gets that wrong sometimes. Lizzie had just read the poem, The Loveliest Village by Oliver Goldsmith, and it starts that way, Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain, and that's how Auburn got its name. The next year, 1839, the legislature approved incorporating Auburn, and that was the year that Thomas Harper, who'd been to visit, married Lizzie Taylor. And they lived in Auburn in what is now North College Street, about where the University Motor Lodge stands. Now let me fast forward this to 1850. The community had 2 boarding schools. I just want to be sure Lizzie was with me. The community had 2 boarding schools, Slayton Male Academy and the Auburn Masonic Female College. And the Alabama Conference of the Methodist Church decided they would build an institution of higher learning somewhere in East Alabama. And Auburn citizens came up with $100,000 in earnest money to get the school. But Greenville, those rich people to the south, they came up with $300,000, and they had the backing of the State Methodist Episcopal Conference, so you kind of have an idea who got the school. A charter was granted to establish Southern University at Greenville. We were pretty sad up in this part of the state, but shortly thereafter, in February, our darkness turned to sunlight when the legislature incorporated East Alabama Male College at Auburn. This private liberal arts college, supported by the Methodist Church, opened its doors on October 1, 1859. The president was the Reverend William Jeremiah Sassonet. He was 39 years old. He had 6 professors, 51 members of the Board of Trustees. That must have really been fun. Poor old 39-year-old guy running a saw like that. Civil War saved him because he wasn't open but 2 years before they had to close for the Civil War. They had 80 students and 100 preparatory students, and the students lived in homes of the faculty and homes of the prominent citizens in town. Room and board was $10 to $12 and a half a month, and fees were $54 a year. The college had just completed its second year when the Civil War broke out. Virtually all the students, except maybe a couple that just were incapacitated, joined the Confederate Army, and classes were suspended for 5 years. Now, Sassonet, and maybe they did this out of kindness to him for these 51 trustees, but he did remain on the payroll until his death, and he remained as president until 1865. The schoolhouse for the students was a brand new 4-door brick building on the spot where Sanford Hall now stands. It was the only building for some years. At first it was the college building, and then it was the main building, and still later it was Old Main. During the summer of 1864, it actually became known in some areas as Texas Hospital because there were more than 400 wounded Confederate soldiers from Texas brought over from battles in Georgia to be treated here. East Alabama reopened after the war as a financially crippled new college with Dr. James Ferguson Dowdell as the president. His salary was $1,500, which was half of the pre-war salary, and a professor's pay was cut from $2,000 to $1,200, and they later cut again to $800 annually. Dowdell resigned under pressure after 4 years, and the faculty committee ran East Alabama the next 2 years before finally recommending that the property be deeded to the state for use as a land-grant college. And in February of 1872, the school at Auburn became state-owned Agricultural and Mechanical College of Alabama. Isaac Taylor Tishner, he was a distinguished Baptist minister and former Confederate chaplain. He became the 3rd president, and he directed the transition from liberal arts institution to land-grant college. Tishner saw the need for providing scientific training in agriculture and engineering, but funds were not available for wide-scale improvements. And during his 10 years as president of A&M, the only funds state money received was that from a small college endowment. They didn't get any state funds at all except from this endowment. Now, state-of-the-art mechanical arts labs and physiology and veterinary science lab, these were, there's on the pictures, it says 1883 or earlier, but I think it's penciled on the pictures. I think maybe that's a little bit too early, so I would say those pictures are probably from about the 1880s, but maybe they're a little earlier than that. Okay, this structure is Langdon Hall. It doesn't look like Langdon Hall, but it was built in 1846 near the intersection of Gay Street and Magnolia Avenue as a chapel for the Auburn Masonic Female College. It was moved to the campus in 1883, and a decade later it was remodeled. The steeple was removed, and outside walls were bricked, and columns and a portico were added. Langdon Hall is named after Captain Charles C. Langdon, a trustee for 18 years, and Alabama Secretary of State from 1885 to 1889. The Langdon Hall Auditorium was for decades the largest in East Alabama, and it was used extensively for meetings of all types, student congregations, lectures, plays, movies, pep rallies, and graduation exercises. And the basement served for several years as a student social center, and it's part of the business office, I think, now. This is the site of a tremendous segregation debate in the 1850s, in which the secessionists are, well, they won the battle, but this was before the war. The next person that comes into view ought to be, it's Dr. William Leroy Brown and his faculty. Succeeding Isaac Tishner as president in 1882 was Dr. Brown, and he was a classical scholar and physicist with profound knowledge of both math and science. He made many important contributions to Auburn. They're just almost legion, but because there was so much growth during his period. But probably the greatest thing that he did was recruit outstanding faculty. And President Brown is the little character in the front center right here. And taking it, the others, I just want you to listen to these names. Front row is Charles Thatch, then General Lane, Otis Smith, and after President Brown, Patrick Mell, Alexander Bondurant, C.A. Carey, and then middle row is Dr. J.M. Stedman, John C. Wilmore, Charles H. Ross, and George Petrie. In the back row is Anthony McKissick, Bennett Battle Ross, and John Wills. Those names are still on a lot of buildings on campus, and he was the one that brought just about all of them to Auburn. Brown was a University of Virginia graduate. He had commanded the Confederate arsenal at Richmond, and he also had served on the faculties at the University of Georgia and Vanderbilt before coming to Auburn. And he led Auburn to the forefront of the South scientific institutions in the 1880s and 1890s. And he did this by using funds from a state fertilizer tax that was passed to try to help out this little school. And he used funds from the Federal Hatch Act to build the Agricultural Experiment Station in that period. During Dr. Brown's 20 years as president, Auburn welcomed fraternities on campus, first in secret and later on openly. They powered electric lights at Langdon Hall, replaced Old Main with a new administrative classroom building after Old Main burned. And it became the first state school in Alabama, college in Alabama, to admit women students. Fielded its first football team in 1892 and established an alumni association, began a student newspaper, published the first yearbook, organized the band, instituted the Rec Tech Pajama Parade, and persuaded the legislature to officially change the name of A&M to Alabama Polytechnic Institute. Here's the group that started varsity football in Auburn. On February 20th, 1882, I'll get it right. On February 20th, 1892, on a muddy field in Atlanta's Piedmont Park, our boys beat Georgia 10-0 in the first major intercollegiate football game in the Deep South. First major, yeah. Okay, there's Rufus Dorsey right here on the front row. And he's third from the left on the front row. He scored our first touchdown, and Jesse Culver's on the second row. And where's Culver? Well, he's right here with his arms folded. He scored our second touchdown. And on the back row are Professor George Atkinson, the tall man with a hat, and then Bob Spooner Fraser, who was the mascot, and then Coach Petrie. Sometimes when I look at this picture, I see it as the beginning of a religion that is so powerful that, well, it's just so powerful. Okay. Okay, next, Captain, these are cadet captains, Clifford Lewis Newman and Allen and Lloyd in the 1880s, mid-1880s, and you see the uniforms, and this was the genesis, I guess, of Auburn being a military-type school for so many of its years, up to the after World War II. where students had to take ROTC if they were going to go to school here. All three of these students, of course, were outstanding. Newman was a graduate in chemistry and agriculture, and I often wondered about whether he was the son of the man who was running the experiment station. I don't know whether he was or not. But anyhow, he also was a real fine baseball pitcher and played pro ball, but he couldn't have played college ball for Auburn because we didn't have an intercollegiate team back then. But he was a great baseball pitcher. In those days, students lived in private homes, and they ate their meals in private homes. And this is a picture of the Mell group from 1890. Professor Mell and his wife are in the back row, and also George Petrie, who apparently was eating with them at that time. It may have been room in there, I don't know. He might have been in 1890. He hadn't been here very long. Mell left Auburn to become president of Clemson in 1903. Auburn cadets participated in a service here at Pine Hill Cemetery on Confederate Memorial Day in 1895. 98 unknown soldiers, many of those were Texans, are buried nearby. And John Frederick Duggar served as director of the Agricultural Experiment Station from 1903 to 1921 and director of the Cooperative Extension Service from 1914 to 1920. He became famous for pioneering research in cotton farming, and of course, there's a plaque out there with his name on it as beyond Ag Hill for some of his research. This next one, I mentioned that fraternities were secret for a while, and they were, and the first social fraternity at Auburn was the SAE fraternity, and it was formed in a cornfield behind Old Main in 1878, and it was pretty hush-hush for a while, and then a year or two later, ATO and Phi Delta Theta chapters were formed. And this shot is the SAE brothers with President William Leroy Brune in 1997. This was after they had come out of the closet. Not in this, but the other one. That's okay. After the frat ban had been lifted. This is Georgia Tech playing football at Auburn, we think, and it was either November 7, 1896 or November 5, 1898 when we played Tech here. First time we beat them 45-0, and the next time we beat them 29-6, and John Heisman was the Auburn coach both years. This is the Ag building that was first vet building. It was built in 1893. And Ag students and a few farmers who were attending a Saturday veterinary science lab conducted by Dr. Charles A. Carey when this was taken in 1898. The first doctorate of veterinary medicine, the first degrees, were awarded in 1909. So they had veterinary science was taught here a good long while before they started the School of Veterinary Medicine. The first band was formed in 1897, and the man with the mustache, second row, third from left, is the only one with a mustache. He's the only non-candidate in the picture also. That's Thomas Fulham, and he remained as director until 1906. This wintry scene was taken by Professor George Petrie. He used the trees along Main Street to frame this silvery scene of the main building in February of 1899. The temperature on Valentine's Day, and I would just, if I weren't with a bunch of historians, I would say this happened on Valentine's Day, but I don't know. But on Valentine's Day, which was February 14th, the temperature in Auburn got a little cool. 7 degrees below zero, -7, the coldest day on record in Auburn. And of course, Main Street that I mentioned eventually became College Street, and main building became Sanford Hall in 1929. 41 years, they named it, 41 years after it was built to replace Old Main. This is the class of 1901, and in the front row, the tall cadet, sixth from left, right here, is Paul S. Haley, who served as a trustee for 51 years. And there, back here, that was my boss. That was Holland M. Howland Mad Smith, Marine Corps General. And he looks kind of relaxed there, doesn't he? Now, I say that's who it is. I looked at a lot of pictures, and I came up with an educated guess that that's Howland Mad Smith, and I don't think anybody around today is going to challenge me on that one. He commanded the Fleet Marine Force for the invasion of Saipan, Tinian, and Iwo Jima in World War II, and retired as a full general. This is cadets drilling on the field due west of Sanford Hall, where Ross Square is today, and this building in the background is the first gymnasium. It was built in 1893 and replaced in 1914, 1915 by the alumni gym. The skyline, you see the church steeple over there? That was a church for blacks that was up on Cox Street, about 3 doors down from West Glen, and it was still there when we moved to Auburn, or something that I think that was what it was. We moved to Auburn in 1938. This is a baseball team of probably 1906 or 1907, although it was listed on, something was written on the back about 1895 or something like that, but it really couldn't have been. 5 of the names of those players are still in evidence on the campus. The front row, we got Professor Bennett Battle Ross with chemistry. We got Ross Hall. Dean George Petrie, history and graduate school, Petrie Hall. Then there's 2 players from the class of 1907. I mean, graduated in 1907. In the back row, the second from left is Professor Arthur St. Charles Dunstan, and engineering, Dunstan Hall. And Tom Bragg, chemistry, Bragg Avenue. Tom Bragg is out of uniform. Well, I've lost my place. Okay. And Dean Clifford Hare next, you know, Cliff Hare Stadium, later Jordan Hare Stadium. And here's Iron Mike McDonough, the little Irishman. He arrived on campus in 1904 and quickly became among the most popular and the most industrious citizen of Auburn. It didn't hurt that his football team that year went 5-0 against Clemson, Nashville, Georgia Tech, Georgia, and Alabama. In 18 seasons, Donahue's teams won 99 games. In some of those seasons, they only played 4 or 5 games, you know. They won 99, lost 35, and tied 5. And they were undefeated in 1913 and 1914. And they had a streak into 1915 of 23 games without a loss. 1 tie in there, but no losses. And Auburn was the Southern Athletic Association champion in 13 and 14 and 19. And I said he was industrious. In addition to football, Coach Mike coached the baseball and basketball and track teams, served as athletic director and also trainer for all the sports programs, taught freshmen mathematics and English, and was a partner for a few years in a clothing store. I wonder what he did in his spare time. Old Baldy Petrie, and that's what the cadets called him. And even when I was growing up here, I heard people mention him as Baldy Petrie. But anyhow, Dean Petrie, he was pleased when the co-eds were admitted to A&M in 1892, and I just wonder how flattered he must have been when these 7 ladies showed up in the history lab in their Sunday finery. Could they have sensed the possibility of a photo op? Kirk Newell was a person that came through Auburn and just absolutely got lost after he left. I don't know if it was World War II or what happened, but he was rediscovered by some writers in Birmingham after a while, and they got him in the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, and he got some honors. But he was a little guy. He never weighed more than about 145 pounds. He was from Dadeville, but he was an athlete of unbelievable proportion. He certainly would have been an All-American football player in 1913, and maybe in 1912, had he received a fraction of the ink of the promotion that other major schools were able to give their players who were their stars. But of course, and the Auburns lived with this for a long, long time. The school was Alabama Polytechnic Institute. Now, you think anybody in New York, Chicago is going to be impressed with something like that? They thought it was probably a girls' school or something. I don't know. But it was relatively little known, perhaps had 650 students, located in a little-known Alabama village of perhaps 1,400 citizens, far from the nearest major city. And in those days, the newspaper was a whole lot more powerful than it is today in the selection of stars. And schools in places like Auburn and places like Starkville and places like other small communities, they did suffer for a long time. But anyway, senior halfback Newell made All-Southern along with 5 other Auburn players in 1913, when we are also the Southern Athletic Association champions. And Auburn won all of its 8 games that year and outscored opponents 224-13, which was fairly decent. This slide appears in a magazine in May of 1915, and this was when they were trying to raise funds Tom Bragg was trying to raise funds to build a gymnasium. It was going to cost $50,000. Now you got $50,000. We didn't have any graduates. I mean, Auburn in 1913, 1914, we'd been a school for how long? Well, nobody graduated the first 20 years hardly to speak of, 2 or 3 here and there. But even when we were graduating a big class, it wasn't very many. And then they hadn't been out of school long enough to make any money. But Bragg almost single-handedly came up with the $50,000 that it took to build this thing. But that was the proposed gym. It's gone now off the screen, but it had wings on it, if you noticed. Well, they said they got the $50,000 pledged, so they built the building, but the wings disappeared. And I just thought, 1915, they changed their minds. We do that all the time here. Think of all the places, locations we've had where some study was made, and they came up and they're going to do this, and they did maybe one project in that study, and then it kind of disappeared. And 10 years later, they come up and somebody comes up with an idea to do that, and they got some other location. Well, anyhow, that's what happened. But anyhow, I thought it was fantastic that they were even able to do this, and they had basketball and dances mainly in there, but they also had speakers in the gym, and it was used from 1915 until 1948 as the Auburn varsity basketball facility. The Spades were founded in 1915 in Auburn, and supposed to be the 10 most outstanding male students. And along the way, they were supposed to be the 10 most outstanding males. But along the way, and I think I'm right on this, I think there were 3 females that, and there may be more than that now, but at one time they had initiated 3 females into the group. It's a self-perpetuating organization, so if you get a lemon in there, and I know a Spade that thought they'd gotten some lemons in there at one time, they can, until 2 or 3 years go by until they get them weeded out again. But the Spades have done an awful lot of work, and they are always listed in the Glomerata at the very start of the organizations. They list Spades, then they list ODK and some of the others and who's who that way. But this is a field trip from Comer Hall to Opelika in 1918. And note that some of them are still wearing their Army clothes. I think you can see, yeah, these guys are all in Army clothes. And this is Thomas Hotel and Jones Hotel in 1920. These were the equivalents of a Heart of Auburn and an Auburn Hotel and Conference Center in its day, 1920s and 30s. They're located on College Street, right next to where the old Tiger Theater used to be, and close to 2 blocks from the depot. So people coming into town to visit normally would stay there. The Kappa Delta is the first sorority we had, and came in 1922. And one of the members was Camille Dowell. She's in this picture, she's this one right here, third from left. And her daddy was the president, was Sprite Dowell of Auburn, so they had the installation in the president's home. And later in 1922, we got a chapter of the Chi-O, and there currently are 18 sororities. At least there are 18 sororities listed in the current Glomerata, and 17 fraternities on campus and listed in the Glomerata. Do I see a cow or two in this thing? Okay. Bear Bryant got in the doghouse with Auburn people by once referring to Auburn as the Cow College. And he said he got deluged with letters of protest. Well, at least in 1924. Who knows? Comer Hall was built as the home of the College of Agriculture in 1910. And after being gutted by fire, the interior was rebuilt in 1924. This team won 20 of 22 games and in 1927-28 and reached the finals of the Southern Conference Tournament. The reason I chose this one was that twins Fob James and Ebb are third and fourth from the left in the front row, and manager Elmer Salter is down at that end. And in the back row, Louis James, he's the brother of the twins, and he was mayor of Auburn briefly, is second from the left in the back row. The first men's team was formed in 1906, and the varsity women's team was formed in 1915. And Will Rogers, it was reported that when Will visited Auburn in 1928, that 1,000 students and townspeople turned out at the Auburn train station to greet the humorist. That's a whole lot of people for 1928, but I don't doubt that it was true, because the man was about as popular as anybody ever was in the United States, per capita, I guess, at that time. Here he's posing with B. Con Anderson. Where is B. Con Anderson's daughter? Sarah? Sarah Hudson's daddy. And B. Con is in there because he was representing the sponsoring Kiwanis Club. And, of course, there's scores of students that hung around him all the time he was here. Before making his talk at Alumni Gym, he stopped outside and he passed out dollar bills to students who didn't have the price of a ticket. And Sarah gave me, the other day, one of the tickets, and they were $1.50. So I don't know whether Will Rogers gave him $1 or gave him $2 and said, keep the change, or gave him $2 and asked for 50 cents back. I don't know. Anyway, afterwards, and my wife's uncle told me this, he was a student at the time, he said that Will, when it was over with, he went to a downtown diner and stayed up all night visiting with the students and bought them all hot dogs and coffee. And so he was extremely popular in his one stand in Auburn. This is the API kindergarten on Mell Street. And It was under the direction of Lula Palmer as part of the home ec training program. And it was one of, if not the first, it was one of the first kindergartens, legitimate kindergartens in Alabama. It was 1928. And the children here, I'm not going to tell you their names, all of them, but I'm going to try to give you a couple. Extreme left, oh gosh, well, too bad. That's Martin Beck. I was hoping this thing would stretch a little bit and he'd be in there. But Martin Beck is still lives here, of course, and his daddy was on the faculty. And then next to him is Paul Irvin, right here. And his daddy was on the faculty. And Paul was in the Knights, and he was in my class in high school. And he's still going strong. Behind the swing is Mary Lee. And Mary Lee, and let's see where Seddon is. No, Bird Lee. Okay, and in the wagon, that's her brother, Bird Lee. And their father was the Episcopal minister here at the time, for years and years. And then holding hands are Betty Grimes Williams. And, you know, she was on the faculty, and Bob Williams, or Robert Williams, and Martha Hay. And that's Preacher Hayes, one of Preacher Hayes' daughters. And also in this picture is Bernie Hay, who's right here. Bernie was Martha's older kid. But anyhow, you know, I think this picture was given to me by Martin Beck on purpose, because Martin is a little bit of publicity shy, and he probably knew he wasn't going to be in the picture. Okay, downtown College Street, perhaps in 1933, 34. Somebody will tell me, can't be, that automobile, something or other, you know. That's always my downfall, because I don't know about when automobiles are built, what they look like. I mean, years, I don't. Anyhow, that object in the road in the foreground, it was cast iron, and it had "stop" written in red glass reflectors on each side, spelled out "stop." And I swear I remember that in 1938, and probably didn't spell out "stop," but it was right in the middle of where College Street went one way and Magnolia the other, and you were supposed to go around it if you were going to make a left turn. This is an aerial of the campus. Whoop, okay, there we are. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Thatch Avenue down here. And you can see the president's mansion over there in the corner, and then there's Martin Hall. This is the old alumni gym with a tennis court there. This is the L building over here, the engineering complex. Brown Hall up at the top. And the tower, in front of the tower, this way a little ways, that's Toomer's drugs. And the Presbyterian Church is up here, main building. And finally, what's this? It's post office. Our old post office. Okay. This is the Dairy Creamery Complex in the late 30s. It's south of, it's on the south side of Sanford Avenue, just west of Auburn Television Station. The silos are gone, but the barns are still there. And now the community sing. This is something that we did when I was a kid here. I don't know when it started, but in the early 30s maybe. And they had community sings in front of Langdon Hall well into World War II. And I think they might have come back and had a few after World War II. Well, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed Congress in person and the nation by radio the day after Pearl Harbor, starting with yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. So the nation again was at war. Everything forever was changed. Auburn students entered the armed forces in great numbers as volunteers and draftees, and our enrollment of 3,640 dropped to 1,710 in 1943. I had a picture I wanted to run of the Burn the Bulldog Parade or something, and my better half, Mickey Logue, said, "Give me a picture with fire in it." So I found this, or we found this. Anyhow, this bonfire is just beyond the stadium, just to the west of the stadium. It was ignited as the finale to the Burn the Bulldog pep rally held on the Thursday before the 1942 Auburn, Georgia football game. Now, this was a happening in Auburn. The band formed at Langdon Hall and marched to Toomer's Corner, where the cheerleaders took over, and when the number of participants became large enough and vocal enough, the band, with the students falling in behind, went down College Street, turned on Thatch, and marched down to the point where the debris was for the start the fire. And as the band went, and repeated it as it needed to, it played Glory, Glory, Tiger Rag, and the Auburn Fight Song. The Auburn Fight Song that we don't use anymore. That night in the Loveliest Village, there was no doubt that come Saturday in Columbus, Coach Jack Marr's boys were going to whoop up on Georgia, and they did. They beat the undefeated, heavily favored Rose Bowl-bound Bulldogs 27-13. It was the coach's final game at Auburn. The next year, Lieutenant Commander Jack Marr coached a much heralded Iowa pre-flight team of all-stars to an unbeaten season. We had the Navy here in force. These sailors were billeted in Grave Center cottages, and you can see in the background, you can see the President's Mansion. And they were taking courses to become radio operators. Auburn also turned over the quadrangle dorms for Army trainee during part of the war. And the girls took over the sorority, the fraternity houses when the dorms were taken over by the Army. And then we had either Navy V5 or V12 in Auburn Hall and maybe somewhere else at one time on the campus. These are API, excuse me. These are API's first drum majorettes in 1946. 2 years later, the ones that were left in school and some others, led the marching band as it passed in review at President Truman's inauguration in Washington, D.C. Danny Sue Connor, second from left, still lives in Auburn. And Danny Sue Gibson Connor and Joanne Bunny Bennett, and I don't know her last name. Edgar. She's extreme right, and she's living in Opelika. Does she live in Auburn now? Stand corrected. That was Mrs. Lipscomb that corrected me. Let the record show. Okay. And this is President Duncan visiting with students in Sanford Park in 1945. The one in uniform is Lenny Payne, who he got pretty much involved before he graduated, but I think he might have been in one of those Navy programs and was still in it here at the time. Third from the left is Lahome McClendon, who was the vocalist with the Auburn Collegians, and Jack Riley. At that time, he was the interfraternity. No, he was Student Government Association secretary. This is May Day at the Quad in 1944. I thought that was pretty good. And this is Tiny Thompson Top and A.G. Wiggins. Many of you knew A.G. They're taking care of the kids. They were put on the kiddie patrol this day, and they were taking care of the kids. This is vet school in 1945, and they were babysitting. And I mean the cheerleaders in our day were something else. And we made this slide bigger than I wish it were smaller, because there's one more that's in there. But this is Joy. Let's see. Let me get them right. This is Joy Justice, and this is Bill Cook, the head cheerleader, and that's Bill Newman, and hiding back there behind Bill Newman is Wiggles Hill, and then Holly Smith also was in there. But they cranked each other up, and they'd go up and do all kinds of stuff like that. Freshman Travis Tidwell led the nation in total yardage that year, and but the Tigers finished with only 4 1946 victories. In games lost, Auburn scored a total of 19 points, while 6 opponents scored 181. The always upbeat Glamourata had a thing that year, said, "Wait till next year." This is Markels. And of course, there's a bunch of local people in that picture. But, well, this is Carol Keller, who was on the wrestling team, and a good wrestler. And he's the only one I'm going to name, because I will miss the rest of them if I try to name it. This is Lingerfeld, isn't it? Isn't it Lingerfeld up here? Right there, behind the thing. Johnny? You know? Okay. Yeah, that's Bill Poor. Okay, but we had Markels on Magnolia, and we had Tumors on the corner, and Lipscomb's down the street, and Wright's a little beyond Lipscomb's, and across the street. I've already left out Benson's. Benson's was in there, and across the street we had Baines. We had 6 drugstores, 5 of them on College Street, between the traffic light and the start of the top of the hill. Wright's later moved to the bottom of the hill, and then the one around the corner at Markels. And this was before we had cars that students could jump in the car, either their new car or their secondary car that they have here now. You know, either the Rolls Royce or the Cadillac. And there weren't cars, and the transportation was a lot more difficult, so these places were a godsend. And this was also before the invasion of fast food. And a whole lot of us high school kids worked as soda jerks in these places. All of them had soft drinks, milkshakes, donuts, cakes, cookies, stuff like that. And Markels had a foot-long hot dog, and Markels and Benson served a little bit more heavy fare than the others. But that was, if you ate at a boarding house perhaps, or you ate at a fraternity, or if you were a woman, you had to eat the quadrangle. And this was between meal stuff and stuff to tide you over when you didn't want to eat the other fare.
Jack, I'm not telling you to stop, but it's awful close about it.
Oh, he's telling me to stop. Okay,
I'm glad for you to go on.
let me do this one. All right. This is Hal Haring Needlenose, who went on to play with Cleveland. He was a signal caller for the Cleveland Browns, I think, defensive signal caller for a while, or a year or two. But this was a A-club initiation after the 1946 football season. And he was the vocalist, one of the vocalists, and he was riding a mule. And these other 2 guys, they were his backup. The one with the stovepipe hat was Charlie Harper from Tallahassee. He was a center. And the other is Bill Waddell of Elba. With that, I'm going to stop, and I think I said at the start I'd just go till now and quit. So I quit, and if anybody has a question or 2 to ask me, I'm sorry that the good stuff is all back here. Sorry you missed it, but I'll have a showing for a small fee that you can come to sometime later. Okay, thank you.